Good morning. Since we are at the diaspora machine, today we need to start, as we enter 2026, what we're going to do is start doing more focused topics related to the Kerala American diaspora. Uh, and then that's going to be our launching pad. And then as we zoom out from that, we will move towards kind of the Dravidian diaspora and then the Indian diaspora as it moves internationally. And then whatever contributions we make to the general Asian diaspora, we're going to use Texas Movement Media as an outlet to express that viewpoint and perspective. Um, as many of you know, Kerala is home to several Christian denominations. So they have a very particular way of looking at the world that's heavily influenced by their faith background. Now, as with anybody who practices a certain faith, there's going to be various levels of what's the word? Um, Fervency. I'm labeled as a zealot. That would be like an extreme version. Um, when the word comes to me, you understand what I'm saying. There's people that practice it more seriously and people that practice it more nominally or casually. But in either case, in the Indian community, particularly in the Kerala community, I will use the word Malayali. We should probably put that in the comments or something like that. That's a very specific word that applies to a specific group of people. We're probably between 300 and 500,000 strong here in the United States, mostly in major metroplex areas. California has a lot. New York has a lot. Texas has quite a bit in Dallas and Houston. Shout out to all you guys down there. And then Chicagoland, of course, has a few as well. And most of the publicity we've received has been because of Texas movement and my own particular journey through life. And so my responsibility is to that demographic first and foremost. And then my citizenship is exclusively with the United States of America. I do not have dual citizenship. As I grow, what I try to do is learn what, in fact, my rights are as an American citizen and what my responsibilities are as a member of the diasporas that I was just referring to. When I look at our value system, I look at it first. I was raised as our faith based value system comes first, and that's the foundation we should build our house on. We seem to be having a light problem here. So as you grow and you lock down your faith foundation, and this can be in any denomination. There's no need to be prejudicial in any kind of way. After that, you're supposed to build your academic foundation. So a lot of us live in middle class to upper middle class suburban environments, which is going to be predominantly Caucasian American. And the Caucasian American community is heavily influenced by Jewish and Jewish American and Israeli propaganda. As you know, there are maybe 6 corporations that own all the mainstream media platforms. They are dying out. Things like Fox News and CNN and all the things you might see on your local television stations. They're only catering to the baby boomer demographic because most normal people now look to social media for their news and YouTube. I noticed that in Russia they use Telegram quite a bit. Thank you, Russia, for giving us the alternative perspective to how things are going in that part of the world. And Texas Movement Media will absolutely commit to making sure as objective of a viewpoint is given when it comes to international affairs, because Texas Movement International is a global organization. With respect to that, this is going to be a message particularly for the Indian diaspora as it pertains to performance. As you know, Texas Movement International has a division called Texas Movement Performance, hosted at performance.texasmovement.com, which applies the concept of tensegrity, which has been referenced several times and written about several times. Tensegrity is a architectural and engineering principle. We've gone over how certain household items can have a tensegrity structure, and when applied correctly, they can show how the body's tensegrity actually works to absorb force and create it. And it's demonstrated by my own athletic performance, sponsored by Hero by Texas movement. And our track and field line will continue to display how that can be put into action. Today, I'd like to go over the work of an author by the name of David Epstein. Now, you may be familiar with the name Jeffrey Epstein, who's in the news very heavily, but one of the things that Jewish propaganda and Israeli propaganda likes to do is just as in tonight's conversations when they had public figures like comedian Richie Fontaine and Keita Rose, and then added characters such as Kitty Rose and Trip Fontaine, meant to kind of distribute the clout evenly. So, in the same way, rather than having all the attention when someone Googles the name Epstein going to Jeffrey Epstein, here is another name by the name of David Epstein, who wrote the book The Sports Gene in 2013, and also the book Range. Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. Okay? So David Epstein's expertise is explaining how people are not given God-given talents, but how uh, physical genetics is what determines people's performance. What that implies, just like Leonardo DiCaprio in Django, when he brought out the skull of his old slave Ben, using the science of phrenology, indicating the divots in the skull, showing that the black population was naturally more civil and subservient, which is why old Ben would shave his master's neck with a straight razor and never have any desire to kill the master. And that was indicated as a genetic predisposition to submission and civility, which was intended to justify slavery. Now, this was done in a Quentin Tarantino movie and dramatized, of course, but the science of phrenology was considered a science for many, many decades and centuries to justify chattel slavery here in America, which the majority of this country is built on. And our suburbs are built off of white flight and mortgages and home equity that is a byproduct downstream of these so called sciences. So I think it's very important that when we encounter something like this, we examine it very closely. And I think if you look at the work of Texas Movement Performance and Alexander Mathai, a native of America, but genetically Keralite Indian, South Indian, Dravidian, very similar in genotype to the Ethiopian or the Aboriginal, certainly more Dravidian than Aryan. I think it's very important that we show the alternative perspective, just like Jeffrey Epstein and David Epstein, just like Richie Fontaine and Trip Fontaine, just like Keita Rose and Kitty Rose. This is another conversation that we're having, like Gavin Newsom likes to say. And so, in the book Range, one of his more recent books, here's how it's described by Daniel H. Pink. Urgent and important, an essential read for bosses, parents, coaches, and anyone who cares about improving performance. Plenty of experts argue that anyone who wants to develop a skill, play an instrument, or lead their field should start early, focus intensely, and rack up as many hours of deliberate practice as possible. If you dabble or delay, you'll never catch up to the people who got a head start. This is the same thing that people like to talk about with compound interest. We discussed that if you start with $100 a month at 25 and someone else starts with $200 a month at 35, you will benefit from those initial 10 years of investment. Similar type of concept is being described here. Where are we at on time? 10 minutes, very good. But a closer look at the research on the world's top performers, from professional athletes to Nobel laureates, Alfred Nobel, the Nobel Prize, remember Donald Trump is a Nobel Prize nominee, show that early specialization is the exception, not the rule. Okay? And then about David. Range, why a generalist triumph in a specialized world. He has master's degrees in environmental science and journalism and has worked as an investigative reporter for ProPublica and a senior writer for Sports Illustrated, and he lives in Washington, D.C. So very well qualified gentleman, familiar with Washington, D.C. and the politics there. But prior to writing that book, he wrote a book called The Sports Gene in 2013. Now remember, in 2014 was when all the colleges kind of changed the way they looked at microaggressions and racial dynamics. And so this Sports Gene was written 1 year before that, and 1 year after Trayvon Martin was shot in Florida while going home. The Malcolm Gladwell's book, I believe, I want to say it was Blink, indicated that 10,000 hours of practice is required to develop expertise in something. Equates to about 10 years. And what David Epstein's argument is that people differ biologically in ways that matter a lot for sports. So the same training plan will not produce the same results in everyone. Now, this would make Texas movement performance completely obsolete as a consulting service. But what we have now is 10 years of evidence-based practice, empirical data that shows, in fact, that one training methodology could, in fact, work for anybody of any racial group. And we have evidence to show that it could work for a young girl that's getting ready for a beauty pageant, just as well as it could work for an offensive lineman getting ready for a combine to participate in the National Football League. Okay? The book critiques the popular idea that anyone can become elite with 10,000 hours of practice, showing that this rule came from narrow cases and doesn't generalize well to most sports. Elite performers usually combine high-quality practice with traits that made them improve faster or start from a higher baseline, so two athletes can train equally hard and still end far apart. Now, this is very important. This is the new version of phrenology, PH, not F, okay? So, phrenology was what showed that old Ben was too submissive and too docile to understand that he was in fact a slave, and he would not revolt against his slave master, and this is how the slaves were encouraged to continue to remain docile in the spite of clear abuse and oppression. And what this is saying is that because of certain limb lengths or tendon lengths, that African-based athletes or African-American athletes are naturally predisposed to speed and power events and anything that implies explosion. And what it's secretly implying that is if African American or African athletes or individuals are predisposed to physical dominance, they are also genetically predisposed to be inferior at cerebral dominance. And you see this playing out with critiques about Lamar Jackson as a quarterback, Michael Vick as a quarterback, Deshaun Watson, and various other black quarterbacks in leadership. And anybody who doesn't have the kind of Russell Wilson timidity and, approachability without denying their culture completely, they're not qualified for leadership. I would love it if we were able to flesh out this conversation a little bit more. This is where I believe Emmanuel Acho could do some positive cultural work because of his wealth of experience and, of course, because of his great moral standing with Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship and his simultaneous exposure to both Nigerian and American culture, African American culture, excuse me. So maybe we could have a panel discussion about something like that, and I would be happy to offer the empirical data that Texas Movement Performance and Texas Movement Media and Hero by Texas Movement can contribute to. That would be something that I'd be happy to do. Um, of course, once we negotiate the proper fee structure. The book emphasizes that top athletes also build superior mental models of their sport, allowing them to anticipate plays and react quicker than raw speed alone would suggest. Years of focused practice create sport specific pattern recognition, like in chess or basketball, but this cognitive edge still sits on a foundation of basic perceptual and motor abilities that may vary between individuals. So essentially, what that means is yes, black athletes can think and they can do certain things well. Remember in Inglorious Bastards when Shoshana said that Marcel was her projectionist, and then Hans Landa said, yes, one might see how that might be a good profession for them. Because when a black athlete is able to focus on one task, they are able to put their entire attention on that, like a horse with blinders on, as long as they're not asked to focus on anything else like equity or the percentage of revenue being taken from them by managers or lawyers or agents. When they're not when they're not burdened by that kind of cognitive dilemma, they can focus more precisely on the task at hand, which is whatever they're instructed to do directly. And we should leave the instruction or the heavy quizzing to people that are more cognitively gifted at birth. And since African based diasporas are less cognitively gifted, we must turn to the more Caucasian and Jewish based diasporas, European Jews, Polish, and so on and so forth, that are more cognitively gifted in order to assign roles of management or leadership and thus higher levels of equity and power and decision making capacity and ultimately compensation. So, this is the premise of David Epstein's work. So, I think it's healthy that we start to flesh out this conversation. And as I said, Texas Movement Performance will continue to update our testimonials. And if you look at the Elite Secrets course, you can see how Texas Movement Performance structures our thinking process and how it has worked across the continuum of all races. And we have plenty of video evidence of testimonials on how our methodology using tensegrity, which does come from a white and Jewish cognitive structure, how we've been able to translate that for all racial demographics, essentially proving David Epstein's work. Let's call it incomplete. Is that a fair compromise? Let's call it incomplete. Okay, so let's pause there for the time being. Let's consider this phase one, and we will continue perhaps once the algorithm has absorbed this information and responded accordingly. Thank you very much for your time.